everybody. How are you? Thank you for joining our webinar today. You're watching the live webinar by Hong Kong Trade Development Council, and I'm Nandy, the host of today's webinar. The topic today is on how to ensure the product quality with suppliers on the other side of the planet. Today we have the audience across the world. We have someone from US, someone from Europe, and someone from Asia. We all working with suppliers in another part of the world. Like today, we have people. Sometimes when we are in US, we work with the suppliers in China, or when I am in Europe, when I'm in the state of Rwanda or anywhere in Texas, I may work with someone 12 hours with the 12-hour differences with me, like in Southeast Asia, and we are sharing something very different, the culture or the practice or routine. And today we are going to share about what we should do to ensure the quality of the product. And for that, we have just seen a video, and that is the hybrid initiative by HKTDC, which is called Exhibition Plus. It combines the physical fairs, virtual fairs, online meetings, and online sourcing marketplace function in one go. For the upcoming physical fairs by HKTDC, we will also launch our online version at our fair website, which replicates the physical fair experience virtually. And you can also make the appointment online to have an online meeting with our exhibitors 7 days before and after our physical fair period. And then it is called kit to match services. And also 1 month before and after our fair period of time, you can still connect with our exhibitors. We can connect to their company information and send inquiries with these exhibitors, and also connect with other over 130,000 suppliers. Our platform has just revamped last year, and we are providing actually more personalized product recommendations. And so for more information, you can just visit our website, sourcing.hktdc.com, or scan the QR code over here to get to know our website. Or after this webinar, you can leave us your contact information and fill up our survey, and then you can send you the update of our initiative, Exhibition Plus, from time to time. Okay, that's the introduction of HKTDC and our services on how to connect to suppliers and buyers anytime, anywhere. And now we are going to introduce our speaker. But one thing more before talking about him is when you have questions, you can just key in the questions and send it to us. If you are using mobile, there's a square, there's a box, a message box at the bottom of your screen, and you can just key in your questions. And if you are using your desktop, and there is a GoToWebinar toolbox, and you can just key in the question. Okay, so it's time to talk about our speaker today. He is Andy Church, the founder and CEO of Insight Quality Services. He has over 20 years experience on product quality and compliance, and his team is helping buyers around the world in 7 countries on managing their quality more effectively, like providing the product inspections, factory audit, lab tests, and other services. Okay, so it's the time that let me introduce Andy. Hi, Andy. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, Lenny. Thank you for the introduction.
Just have a very brief introduction of you to talking about your experience, but I think it's better to give you the time yourself. And so I give you the time to talk about yourself, so to let us to get to know more about you. Can I?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. As you mentioned, I founded Insight Quality, and I began my career over 20 years ago as an inspector in the United States. And shortly after a couple years of being an inspector, I had the opportunity to move to China in the early 2000s with an American-based quality assurance service provider who had testing labs throughout the world, and they also provided product inspections and factory audits. And so I got my experience largely on the ground in China before I founded Insight.
I see. So, so today we're talking about the product quality, and I know your company has a lot of experience on that. But before that, actually, when we are talking about why we want to do something, we want to know if we don't do the product quality assurance properly, what's the problem of that?
Well, the consequences of not managing product quality can far exceed the cost of a return or a product that can't be resold. Poor customer reviews can lead to future lost sales, canceled purchase orders, loss of clients, and even product recalls. So not properly managing quality can have very broad consequences.
I see. So if you want to tackle this problem, so are there any tips that you are going to share with us on how we to do that? And I heard that you have some tips on hand that you are going to share with us today, right?
Yes, I did have 5 steps to managing quality that can apply remotely or a combination of remotely and using third-party service providers.
Okay, remember 5 steps altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think you can share the screen because there's a button over there. Then so can you share the screen to us so all of us will have like will understand what are those 5 steps that we have to take care.
Right. I think you
Thank you.
can see the 5 steps to.
Yeah, I see it very clearly.
Yeah, great. So before I get into those, I'd like to share a couple of examples that we've had over the years that would be comical if not for the severity of the issues severity of issues. One is we had a retail client of ours that carries seasonal holiday decor in their stores, and one year they had designed a hanging Christmas decoration that said "Let it snow." When the client received their shipment, they were far from happy. The Christmas decorations had a misspelling, so instead of saying "Let it snow," it said "Leb," L-E-B, instead of a L-E-T with a T. And it turned out that the product specification that they provided to us included photos with the misspelling, as the original samples that were sent for the client to approve were not accepted. And they communicated that change to the factory, but they didn't get new approval samples to review and approve, nor did they update their product specification. So had they received corrected approval samples, most likely the product spec would have been updated and a sample would have been available for the inspector to use during the inspection. But without a proper approval sample, the inspector didn't recognize anything was wrong. And in fact, from the inspection standpoint, there wasn't anything wrong because the product was inspected to a product specification. And another example was a product that was unsaleable, happened to a jewelry client of ours who had begun to seek additional suppliers because they had significant growth, which is a great thing usually, and they needed to expand their supplier matrix. After they identified a factory, they received approval samples, reviewed them, approved them, sent a sample back to the factory for them to keep and one to us to use during the inspection. We conducted the inspection and it passed. A few months later, they began to receive complaints from their retailer that stores were complaining that stones were falling out of one of the styles of jewelry. So we did some research and testing to determine why this was happening. And we were able to determine that the factory had used a poor quality glue. And after determining what the issue was and that there was no way to fix or remedy the situation, all the items had to be pulled back from retail. Our client had to accept all the returns, and with their contract with their retail client, they had to cover the retailer's lost margin. So the cost was significant. And had our client, they had only worked with a couple factories at that point, which is good and bad. And those factories had taught our client most of what she knew about jewelry manufacturing, but not everything. And one of the things when she created her product specification that she didn't specify was the type of glue to use. And the factory that she chose used a lower price glue, lower quality, lower price, and what seemed like a good deal in finding a new supplier that had more capacity than her current suppliers turned out to be just the opposite. Those are just two brief examples of issues that could have been avoided had proper steps been taken to ensure that the quality met and hopefully exceeded our clients' expectations.
Understood. But I have a question. Okay, so when we are doing a production, okay, then the specification list can be very, very long, and sometimes we're just thinking, oh, that a long list, will they miss something? So should we make it? How to make something? Should we have like something make it more clear, or actually we just pull out all the things together, or what's tactics that okay we can highlight something very important, but at the same time we don't miss something that they miss. Okay, because if the list is too long, sometimes they, oh, it's too long, I will just miss it. But if it's too short, as what you say, then ooh, actually we miss it. So they will just find something not really want to. So I'm just thinking how to optimize the link for the details that when we are going to make something, say, here, is it as many as possible, or just some highlights, or what we should make, how to make it clear?
Well, I don't know that there's a set length that is ideal for product specifications. I mean, it needs to outline all the essential requirements for manufacturing a product. And one of the points I want to make is it should be a living document. That means you don't create it and it's done. As changes are made or you incorporate data from returns or reviews, it's important to incorporate those. But some of the specifics that should be in a product specifications are materials, the components, the size, shape, drawings, tolerances. If you specify, it doesn't matter, what it is, a 5-inch stapler, you want to make sure that the stapler is 5 inches, as what color it may be, logo placement. So, it's very important to have a robust product specification that includes every element of the product that you expect to receive and ultimately sell to your clients, whether that's B2C or on to B2B.
Oh, I see. So it sounds like the best thing is to put as many as possible.
Yeah, I mean, and this is really important.
It seems like we have said as well.
Yeah, sorry, I'm also hearing it. Can you hear me okay now, Lenny?
Yeah, just go on. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, more detail is better, and there is a distinction between buying an OEM or versus ODM product, but even buying a product from a factory that isn't custom and a client wants to change the color or add a logo, it's important that that be part of a product specification. So certainly custom products have much more detail and drawings, but it's important to have as much detail as possible in the product specification.
Understood. So I think the first point you have said about to talk about the key product specification, and the second thing you are saying carefully evaluate the new manufacturers. So I think for the old manufacturer, we know them very well. We know how they perform. But I think that's the really a big problem that when we are looking for new manufacturer, because recently we have done a research on the buyer behaviors across the world, and we see that because of the COVID, many people they are looking for something new for their for new product, or maybe something new. They may not understand that, and they are looking for new manufacturer. New manufacturer, not just like when I sell a pen, I found a new pen manufacturer, and also now I have to sell something like I have to sell a phone case as well, which is I'm not quite familiar with, and I have to look for some suppliers that I haven't worked with, and on the product that I'm not very familiar with. So when we are doing that, what we should consider or we should bear in mind.
Well, I mean, as clients look at placing orders with new factories, there's different ways to evaluate them. And the first would be getting samples, verifying that the factory exists, copies of their business license. On paper, a factory may look like they meet your requirements, and knowing that you're working with a factory versus a trading company. Samples, they offer reasonable pricing. The next step would be ensure before you place an order and wire deposit is consider a factory audit, verifying that a factory exists, they have the capability to produce the item that you are placing an order for. If you're placing an order for, you just showed a mobile phone case, do they have the plastic injection molding equipment in their factory to do so, or do they have a bunch of sewing machines? The fact that they have sewing machines isn't a bad thing, but if they don't have plastic injection molding machines and they're selling you plastic cases for mobile phones, then they may be subcontracting that out. So it's important to understand what a factory's capabilities and their capacity is before placing an order. And you mentioned earlier on COVID and not being able to travel the last couple of years is provided lots of challenges both to our clients and to service providers. And so there's ways to verify a factory exists without having an audit conducted in person, either with our clients doing that themselves or a buyer or having a third-party service provider like Insight visit, is ask for the factory for existing audit reports. Review those. Sometimes they may provide those and sometimes not. And if they choose not to because maybe perhaps they were paid for by another client, respect that. But certainly consider conducting a factory audit, which would cover areas such as the factory's capability, their capacity, the number of pieces of types of equipment. Does the factory have a quality control system in place? And does it include procedures for conducting inspections, incoming raw materials and line, final inspections? How do they handle nonconformity of raw materials or production? So those are the things that we look for in an audit, because those are very important to ensure that the factory has the capability to produce what they say they do, the capacity to meet our clients' needs, either, if not immediate needs, longer term as they anticipate growth. And there's other components of audits that can be conducted as well, such as social accountability, environmental, and security audits. And those are on a case-by-case basis based on the buyer's needs and who their end client may be. If somebody is buying product and reselling it to a retailer, a lot of time the retailers require social accountability and security or CTPAT audits. And one final point I'd like to make about evaluating new manufacturers and audits is that when an audit is conducted, it's like taking a snapshot in time. It's what the auditor observes while they're at the factory. It wasn't what may have been the condition at the factory the day before or what it'll be tomorrow or next week, but it's what they observe while they're there. So documentation and processes are important and records, but it's also, is the auditor observing the factory following their own processes? So, and I made the point earlier about a trading company and a factory, and trading companies bring great value, and there's opportunities to use them and utilize them to a large degree, especially if you have a wide assortment mix. But one of the easiest ways to find out if you're working with a trading company is just mention audits, advise your point of contact that you'll be requiring an audit. And many times trading companies, especially if they may not be bringing a lot of value or don't believe they're bringing value, will refuse an audit. They'll refuse to share the factory details. They'll consider that proprietary, and that should raise a big red flag. Trading companies who are providing design services or value add should be transparent with who they are placing their order with. So one of the easiest ways I've found over the years to find out if a client or somebody that we're working with is dealing with a factory direct or a trading company is start mentioning audits. And then if there's a lot of red flags or obstacles and why an audit cannot be conducted, that usually is an indication you're working with.
So what we say is, like, I think to be transparent, to understand what they are, and then the audit reports. And even you cannot go to there by yourself. I think the audit reports can help, and we have to load the capacity equipment. And the test is not just one time, it's from time to time. Okay, so I see there's a very interesting word called golden sample. Like, okay, after we understand this little manufacturer, we have to always develop a golden sample. What does it mean, golden sample? What's the meaning of that?
Well, the term golden sample, I sure didn't coin it, and I didn't, not sure where it originated, but it means it's perfect. Golden, we think of a golden sample as something that's perfect. And when a buyer is looking at placing an order with a factory, or they're evaluating the quality of several factories before placing an order, you should receive approval samples to approve. And those samples should be perfect, hence the term golden samples. So, the factory, the approval sample is quite simple. A couple steps and simple and straightforward is the buyer would advise the factory of the specifications, and maybe they're not as detailed out. We were discussing product specifications early on and what they should include. And at the first stage of factory evaluation and approval samples, if they may not detail everything out, but the objective would be to provide as much detail to the product early on. So they produce approval samples for a buyer to review. The buyer receives those samples, reviews them, checks to make sure that they match their specifications. And there may be times where changes are made, not from a quality standpoint, but the color was a little off, or the sizing of a logo, instead of on the collar, they may want to place it somewhere else or make it a little bit bigger. And so if those changes are made, and the first example I gave about the Christmas decoration, it's important to get a follow-up sample to review and approve to ensure that the changes desired were made and made to your expectation. And only after the sample is approved should the supplier start producing the goods, or should the buyer even place an order and follow up with the factory on making the order. And the sample, a golden sample or approval sample, can be used for comparison at the time of inspections going forward. And ideally, there should be a minimum of 3 samples that the buyer, and they all match, that the buyer receives, approves. They keep one, return one to the factory, and provide one to the inspection provider to use at the place of inspection. So not having an approval sample in place can make it difficult to hold your factory accountable if there's issues, and it also presents challenges at the time of inspection, because it's easy to conduct a product inspection to a product specification, but it is ideal to do that with a product specification and an approval sample together.
I see. So then that means actually, I think that gold sample is something like it's like a benchmark of doing before production. Then you mentioned one thing is about the inspection, and so you're saying that develop an inspection and testing plan. What should be included for this plan? What's the steps or the procedures or the component of this plan?
So absolutely, a product quality inspection is a procedure that is checking various attributes of the product to ensure that it meets the buyer standards before it ships. So for simplicity purposes, I'll break it down into 3 components. First, the inspector would verify that the order is complete, all the items have been produced. I mean, a purchase order could be simple and be 1 item, 1 SKU, 1 color, 1,000 pieces. And there could be POs that have dozen or dozens of items in different color combinations. So the inspector needs to verify that all those products have been produced, are completed and available for inspection. And then the inspector would randomly select from the order products to inspect using a sampling method, AQL. We're not going to go into AQL today, but it's a statistically valid sampling methodology. Then the inspector would conduct an inspection using a checklist that has components such as packaging, labeling, quality attributes, visually and functionality of the item, and things that some tests can be conducted on site at an inspection. For an example, like textile or garments, there could be stress tests or verifying the number of stitches, fatigue tests on button. I don't know, I'll pull my button off while we're talking, but buttons, that, or weight tests like on furniture. So there's things that can be conducted, testing that can be conducted in the field. And then once the inspector conducts the inspection, the next step would be reviewing the findings with the factory, and then completing and providing a formal inspection report to the buyer. And even with a pass rating, typically the most common ratings are pass-fail. Some service providers, and Insight's one of those that does use a hold rating, it's important that the buyer review the inspection report, even if it's passed, to ensure there's no issues. To reference my example, the first example again with the Christmas decoration, that inspection passed. Had the buyer looked at all the photos and seen a misspelling, then they may have caught it before it shipped, because sometimes, those things are rare, but they do happen, and they could have caught it. So a product inspection checklist should be detailed. It should incorporate much of the detail, maybe not all, but much of the detail of the product specification, and it should be provided to the factory early on so they know what the buyer is going to be inspecting, and they should be conducting inspections internally to the same degree. And then the second piece is laboratory testing.
So
yeah. Okay. So laboratory testing is very similar to an inspection in that there's a testing protocol that needs to be created before the item is produced, and most labs will provide generic test protocols for review prior to submission because they need to know what they're testing to provide a test quote. But testing is distinct from inspection, and there's often testing that can only be done in a lab and not at the point of inspection, like analysis of metal composition or lead or hazardous substances, flammability, that type of thing. And it's important for testing to be done to ensure regulatory compliance for where the goods are going to be imported. There's different regulations if goods are imported into the U.S. versus Australia, or so domestically in a country in Asia. And testing can be done at any stage. You can test incoming raw materials like paint for lead, hardness of metals, but post-production, when items are completed, it's best to get an item from post-production or that's been completed and gone through the production process to test those for compliance before goods ship to ensure that they're compliant, both regulatory and also any particular standards or requirements the clients have. And I mentioned that a test protocol should be created, and that should also be included early on with the PO and the product spec, the inspection requirements, and the testing requirements with the purchase order to the factory. So there's no surprises. They don't come back and say, you didn't tell me that my item was going to be required to be tested and need to be compliant with certain regulations. A couple things to note when working with a lab is make sure that they're accredited to ISO 17025. And if you're importing into the U.S., verify that the lab is CPSC accredited. The CPSC is the Consumer Protection Safety Commission in the U.S., and that's specific to the U.S. There are other requirements in Europe and the UK, Australia. They all have their own requirements. But the CPSC has a tool called the Regulatory Robot, and if you're not sure what requirements may be in place for your product, it's a really good place to start because a lot of those requirements will be similar, if not the same, they'll be similar to other countries, and it's a free tool that's available to anybody by going to the CPSC website.
I see. So actually, I think many of these requirements can be checked online I think many councils is providing something similar. So, okay, after doing this, we really understand what we should take care and should put more attention when we are doing this inspection review.
Yeah, so reviewing inspection and test reports is very important. I mentioned about the Christmas decoration again because it's a great example. It's I shouldn't say it's one of my favorite, but it's a prime example of this. The product was designed in a native English speaking country. The client missed it. To expect a non-native English speaker to find an issue that's grammar or misspelling is unrealistic if a native speaker's found it. And so had that inspection report that passed been reviewed in detail, that might have been caught, not for certain, but it would have been caught at times when inspections pass marginally, which means you're allowed, say, 10 defects and allowed 10, accept 10 or less and rejected 11 or more. And if the inspection is at 9 or 10 defects, it's important to look at that and make sure the factory is addressing those issues so future orders don't have that same defect. They improve their quality. Or if testing is marginally passed, lead is a very high result, but it passed, that may be something that want to keep a close eye on in the future and perhaps test incoming raw material paint to make sure that it's lead free or well within the requirements. So reviewing inspection data, test data is important, can provide invaluable insight, no pun intended with our name, but can provide invaluable insight and data that could be incorporated into enhancing or changing the product spec, the test protocol, the inspection checklist. So And as I mentioned, it's very important as changes are made to those documents to provide them to your factory to make sure that they're aware of the changes.
Okay, I see. So it's quite clear this low actually there are 5 steps there, and I think what we do, yeah, this is really clear. So I see. Sorry, Andy. I see there are a lot of questions coming in. So could I just? I want to start asking some of them. So I think there's quite a lot. So guess it's all around. They're all inspired by 5 steps. Because like I see the one question just coming in. It said okay, just when we're talking about having some inspection company to or third party to do the inspection, there's someone called asking how do you hold the third party inspection company responsible for the test inspection reports? That means actually we ask them to do that, we pay for that. How to make them hold the responsibility about the result?
Well, accountability and responsibility is important for a service provider and to the factory. It's important to note that inspection or testing isn't an insurance or a verification that a shipment is defect free. I mentioned AQL earlier. It's a sampling methodology, and it's based on what is the worst tolerable level of quality that you're willing to accept. And so a past inspection doesn't mean that there's not going to be any defects in an order. It just gives you an indication of what the defect level would be. Now, with that said, it's important to provide detailed specifications. I mentioned a couple of examples of the glue and the jewelry and the Christmas decoration where product specs did not detail out an issue where there ended up being an issue. So every service provider is a little bit different as far as what their liability is. And when you're looking at working with a service provider, a question to ask him is what's their limit of liability if an issue is found 3, 4, 6 months or a year later, what would be the recourse? But it's important to make sure that quality begins with the buy. And if product specifications are not detailed out, a factory may take shortcuts. A service provider may not have the accurate information to conduct an inspection to the buyer's expectations. So my last comment to that question will be you can't inspect quality into a good. So, if there's poor quality, an inspection should convey the results of what was found, but you can't inspect quality into a good.
So actually, I think before the production is about the details, and we cannot just rely on the past experience. We have to, at that moment when we do the inspection, before that, we have a very clear detail and have definition on the responsibility and the extent that we are going to inspect before due, right? Okay. Well, some questions coming in. How to define if an AQL fit what the company's product need? I think that's from if the AQL fits what the company's product need. Okay. Okay. Maybe there's another question I want to ask first because it's when we're talking about the routine, I want to say how to build up an ongoing supplier management system based on a company's size and demand. I think what they want to say is like, okay, we know that we have our new suppliers. We worked with them before. It seems like quite good. We want to sustain the relationship with them. But now we want to have an ongoing supplier management system so we can check the thing from time to time. I think that's what they want to say. So are there any system that they can help them? Okay, of course we can do it one by one. On this time I do that, and this time I do that. But are there any system to help us to standardize or make it as a routine that we don't need to do the thing starting from scratch every time?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Lenny, about the.
So what they want to say is any ongoing supplier management system for us to monitor. Okay, whenever we have some new suppliers, we want to check their quality. Are there any ongoing supplier management system to do that?
I don't know that there's any tools that would be applicable to everybody, all the different needs that exist out there. I would say that having a quality management system is important for buyers. I mentioned several tools that should be a part of a quality management system: product specification, inspection checklist, testing protocols, audit requirements. And so we work with clients of all different sizes that have nothing in place to those that have very robust documentation. They have quality department, with dozens of people that support their quality needs internally. And so the first place to start is with a product specification and then the things I've listed. Recognize that it's a living document. And if you don't have much documented now, start with detailing your product out and have a goal of creating a quality system.
Yeah, okay. So, there's another question. It's something about now. Okay. It seems COVID is less influential now, is alleviated a bit. How do you think about the quality assurance practice before, okay, well now, after the COVID, or like the effect is a little bit alleviated? Any changes on our quality insurance, our quality assurance practice after the COVID?
So our quality assurance practices after COVID compared to during COVID, I would think that during COVID has created numerous challenges with travel restrictions between countries, within countries, how to conduct inspections or remotely when it's not possible to send a third-party inspection in. So I think changes after COVID, whatever that may entail, will largely, I think, stay the course where, if possible, to minimize cost, there may be remote viewing or video inspections with the factory, something for buyers who may not be able to afford a third-party inspection. That's something they could do themselves. But I think that there isn't going to be a replacement for on-site visits, both for inspections and audits, that is going to be permanent and lasting after COVID restrictions ease up.
There's another question. It's something we always receive on our platform as well. How can I distinguish manufacturer and traders? Because sometimes I want to work with the manufacturer, but sometimes when we talk to them, it seems like they are traders. So usually, I think that's about the stage when you're talking about the evaluate the new manufacturer. Any tips to identify manufacturer and traders and differentiate?
Well, first, I'm going to ask point blank: Are you a vendor, or trading company, or are you the manufacturing facility? Oftentimes, there's an assumption on the part of buyers that they're working direct with the factory. That's not always the case, and so first ask, and then if you're told that you're working direct with the factory, I have found that one of the quickest ways to confirm that is advise that you're going to conduct an audit. And if they refuse or don't provide their factory license or authorization to conduct an audit, that's often a red flag that they're a trading company. There's nothing wrong with working with a trading company or a vendor, especially if the buyer has a large assortment of product categories or goods. Often trading companies can do a very good job in providing an assortment of goods to a buyer, or if you need additional services such as design or other work. I would first ask, include an audit in any request or order, and any flags that come up, or any refusal to conduct an audit or transparency around the factory name should raise a red flag. So it's ask and then an audit. Business license, if your point of contact doesn't want to agree to an audit and you don't push it too much, ask for the factory's business license, or your point of contact's business license, the factory, which would have the factory name. Ask for their export license. Most countries in Asia, as manufacturers, are required to have multiple licenses. So get copies of all those, and never assume. Always ask.
Okay, I see. So some more questions. There's quite a lot of questions over there. How can we evaluate the suppliers of our suppliers?
We have a few customers that go into tier 2 or tier 3 suppliers. It's not very common, especially in consumer goods where that takes place. So it really depends on your product, the risk associated with it, the factory you're working with. So if a buyer, one of their requirements is it's important for them to audit or have some kind of visibility and transparency into the factory supply chain, their suppliers, then make that known at the very outset of discussions with your factory that you will require a list of subcontractors or suppliers, maybe on key components. But that would be, there is no blanket answer to that, but it's on a case-by-case basis. So for example, we have a bike client that the bike assembly location, they send out the bikes to be painted to a paint shop, and they have us inspect the goods after they're the frames after they're painted, but before they're returned. It saves a couple of days of transport time, and if there's any defects found. So that's an example for one of our clients where we're in one of their supplier or subcontractor locations, and it's just a case-by-case basis.
Okay, I see. So there's a question from an SME, from a small company, say that when there is a dispute with the supplier, okay, after the inspection, there's a dispute. Any effective way to raise the complaint, or any arbitrary or independent organization to deal with this kind of dispute, or when there are inspection problem or things like that?
Yeah, well, I mentioned early on, I think it relates to one of your first questions about culpability or what recourse is there if there's an issue found with products after an inspection. So, any service provider should have a contract in place with their client on inspections and what the recourse may be. In each service provider is different on potential arbitration. We fortunately have not had, on knock on wood, not particularly superstitious, but we haven't had anything go to arbitration or to that point. I mean, dialogue and communication is critical in dealing with suppliers and factories. But if there's an issue with the goods received, it would lie with the factory on what the recourse, is. It's a no-win situation for anybody in the order process, whether it be the service provider, the buyer, or the factory, if goods did not meet the client's expectations and may not be saleable. So, it just depends. But ultimately, it's going to be, what is in the contractual agreement between the service provider and the contracting entity for the inspection, and also the buyer's contract with the factory. Inspections are not insurance. They're a measure, a practice that can be taken to minimize the risk associated with receiving goods that are either poor quality or not in compliance with the country regulations where they're being imported.
I see. So, sorry, there are so many questions today, but I want to ask the last two questions because I summarize all of them together. The second last question is okay. With the reference of your experience, what financial responsibility that we can ask the third-party inspector to bear? For example, if I want to have a deal with them, when we want to talk about the financial responsibility, what we should talk with them, like what is that, or what the terms or costs that we should include when we want to talk about the financial responsibility of this third-party inspectors.
The financial responsibility as far as who's paying for the inspection?
Yeah. Like the inspector, okay, maybe they cannot do it better, or they don't do their work well. Any course that we should do, like the financial, the penalty or this kind of thing. Any tips on doing that kind of financial responsibility in the course when we are having a deal, when we are hiring our third-party inspector?
So the financial responsibility, if there's a problem with the goods, or or who's paying for the inspection?
The problem with the good, or maybe they don't do the inspection well.
Well, that question, it sounds like is several different people have asked that different ways with the culpability of financial responsibility, who's responsible, and I feel like I've answered that. Um, if the inspection, somebody believes an inspection wasn't conducted well, the first place to start is discussing with the service provider, why the buyer doesn't feel it's conducted well, and then what their recourse may be based on the contract that they have in place with the service provider. Every service provider is different as far as what their financial culpability or responsibility, what their limitations or their liability may be. So there's not a blanket response to that would apply to everybody. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that's what they are asking. And the last question, okay, we know that we have many things to inspect. Okay, are there any can we conclude in a few words what aspect that we when we want to inspect, like some key areas that we should take care of when we list out those requirements for inspection?
Yeah. So quality of the good, functionality is typically the most important aspect of an inspection. Over the years, packaging and labeling has become as important as the quality of the goods because many retailers and e-commerce platforms have chargebacks if the goods are not labeled properly. You may not think that having a master carton with weight listed on the master carton and then the weight is not what is listed would be that big of an issue, but it is not only for the retailers who receive and maybe they're automated in their distribution centers receive, but also customs, U.S. customs, if you're going into Europe, the UK, Australia. If there's a discrepancy between the weight of a container and what is on the bill of lading, that can have implications, special call outs for inspection, which have their own by customs. So functionality, quality aspects, but also product labeling, packaging are very important. Every item is different as far as functionality, but it comes down to like in apparel, functionality and some of the checkpoints would be measurements. Every size, if you have small, medium, large, it's very important to provide what those measurements should be on a garment and have those inspected. If it's an electronic item, does it work? Does it, you had a mobile phone case, but if somebody is sourcing tablets or mobile phones, do they connect to the network? Do they connect to Wi-Fi? Do they take pictures? Is the picture clear? Is there cracks or smudges or whatnot on the item? And so the inspection checklist is critical to detail out all the aspects that should be checked. But the main ones would be functionality, quality, components, visually checking, product packaging, labeling would be the 4 or 5 most important aspects to include.
Understood.
But I'll point out, because there are so many numerous questions about financial culpability and limitations of liability, that if details are provided to a third-party inspection service provider to conduct an inspection and the specific attribute was not called out or inspected and it's something that may be out of the norm, it's going to be difficult recourse to go to the service provider or the factory and say, why wasn't this made? This is what I wanted. Well, if that want is not communicated to the factory or the service provider, then there's no way to verify it or check it against a standard or a spec or approval sample.
I see. So I think, of course, we want to have something simple, like I think 5 key points or else. But from what I hear today, what I learned, a very important thing is like we have to know the details as detailed as possible before everything, because you have to know what the details, list it out, have a very clear understanding and definition between the supplier and the buyers, so the dispute can be minimized. Rather than do it like what you say, we are not going to inspect the goods. We are going to inspect the production before and have a better definition, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Today we have so many questions, but I'm so sorry today we don't have that many time. So, but but actually we will gather all together and we will send it back to Andy, and then we can share it later on. So, I would like to thank Andy a lot for today's sharing. It's really, really fruitful, and I really like that. And it's simple. It's something very concrete and simple, but actually we have to do that. And some keywords detail and do it before the production is the key things that we have to take care of. So thanks again. Thank you, Andy, for your sharing. I really appreciate that. And I know you guys have a lot of questions. I see the list over here. So after this webinar, we will have a survey. So please tell us what you want to ask and what you want to know in the future, because it's not the only webinar we are going to do. We are going to do more to talk more about the buyer's trend and the knowledge about sourcing and supply chain. That's what we're going to do. So tell me what you want to hear, and we prepare for you. And tell me who you are, so we can connect with you and tell you more from time to time about the articles. And actually, Andy has shared with us some write-up about him about the supply chain as well and quality assurance. So you can see on the screen there is some QR code over there. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, and we share all the links over there from time to time. And if you are from China, you can also scan the WeChat, and we have something about how to do the international trading over there as well. Okay, thank you once again for everyone, and thanks for your time, and have a good Friday today. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.